Welcome back to Inside the Game with CNHI Sports. I'm George Bremer, the Colts beat writer for CNHI Sports Indiana, and each week we're going to take you inside the biggest headlines with experts from the CNHI Sports family around the country. Let's get started with the NFL and Bill Burt of CNHI Sports Boston. Let's talk some football now with Bill Burt. And Bill, one of the things that I've heard a lot of coming out of week two, obviously the injury status across the league, a lot of big names went down. What's your take on the correlation, if any, between the lack of off-season work and these injuries that we've seen so far in week two?
100%. So I think there is a correlation. I've talked to Steve Diassi often. Steve Diassi played several years with the Giants and then was a long snapper with the Patriots under the Parcells run there for most of it. And I'd done a story a couple of years ago about, because they'd cut padded practices down. This has been going on for a couple of years in the NFL. And the point was Parcells in the 80s would double up. They would wear pads 4 days a week where other teams would do it once. And he said it was hard. It was very hard. But he said we had less injuries and we were more suited for the playoffs, believe it or not, because your body is used to taking the hits. Now, you say ACL. I get it. ACL tears. But maybe the rest of your body isn't really where it needs to be around maybe the joints. I think there's a lot to it. And I mean, this is not freaky. This happened. This was rampant yesterday. And I think it's a good sign because I think we're hearing a lot of the NFL players said, wow, I like this offseason. I like, very little hitting. And unfortunately for football, I don't think it helps the game. I think it helps physically. And look, I think Diassi said also at the end of a season, you're really sore and you needed extra time after a season. Maybe you go through 3 games in January, 2 games in January. But the point was, yes, there is a correlation. I think there is too many. This is too freakish for I think it was like 10 Pro Bowl guys to be gone.
Yeah, it was like a 45-minute stretch where it seemed like there was somebody, somewhere all around the league going down, and most of them were season-ending injuries. There's a few guys. I know Christian McCaffrey, they're expecting to come back in Carolina, but Saquon Barkley's done for the year. Nick Bosa's done for the year. It seems like the 49ers in particular got hit really hard. How does that affect the NFC race?
Yeah, it does. So that's really, and this was brought up, COVID's obviously different. Not having fans is going to be different. Places like Kansas City, Seattle, which, their teams thus far have overcome not having fans. But, you get later in the season, that's important. I believe you miss Jimmy Garoppolo for 2 or 3 games. I'm basically almost writing them off. Not yet, but again, that extra playoff spot. Remember, we now have 7 playoff spots instead of 6, and that playoff spot, as I've said, going into the season, because of all the ramifications of COVID and not working out and coaching being important, I think that 7th spot could win the Super Bowl. And I never would have said that. It could be a 9-7 team, but if they have everything right, including injuries, and because I think injuries are going to be very important. And if this happens again, I think if you bet on $1,000 on the Colts to win the Super Bowl, as crazy as that would have sounded, it's not crazy if they're a 9-7 or a 10-6 team, which it looks like they could be now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right. I think that's every year Frank Reich's whole thing is go 1-0, which basically means focus on this week, block everything else out. That's not that original around the league. That's the thought process in most of the 32 cities. But I think that this year more than any other, that's what you have to do, because the landscape changes so much during a game and from week to week. And I absolutely believe teams that get in the playoffs this year more than any other, the team that's healthiest at that time of year, the team that's hottest at that time of year, probably going to walk away with a Lombardi trophy. Looking at the 49ers situation a little bit further, widening that out to the NFC West, that division on fire so far, maybe the best division in football through 2 weeks. As you said last week, and I 100% agree, we're probably going to have to wait at least a month before we really know anything about anybody. But we look at the 2-0 teams around the league. There's 3 of them, I believe, in the NFC West. One that catches my eye right away, the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray's playing really well. They added DeAndre Hopkins. Cliff Kingsbury seems to have that offense rolling. This is a team that's been a surprise for me. Who among the 2-0 group is a surprise for you right now?
In the West or just overall?
Overall in the NFL.
Well, there's 2 teams. Chicago Bears. I did not see this team as being better than 7-9. They still could be 7-9. The Raiders, 2-0. Lo and behold, that was a really nice win last night, but they needed the win. I think they needed it more. I'm a big need guy in the NFL, especially early in the season. Like the Raiders can't go 0-2 or they have a game like this where you're playing in New Orleans who's got their best player hurt. These are sort of the games you absolutely have to win if you want to be a decent team. So both those teams, I don't trust either one. I didn't trust New Orleans coming in either. I mean, New Orleans is up 2 scores, second quarter. It looks like they're going to be a 15-1 team. And now all of a sudden, Drew Brees looks old, and they all of a sudden don't look like they look like they're going to be a 9-7 team. My point is, overall, it is early per se, but I think for the most part, I think 1-1 is a good place to be. This is like, how do I say? This is like Saturday in the Masters or Friday. Just be in the hunt for 2 or 3 more weeks. But I'm not sold on Chicago, and I'm definitely not sold on the Raiders.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's moving day in the NFL, so to speak, here for probably all of September. Get yourself in place and try to make strikes later in the year. With that in mind, huge game Monday night, 2-0 teams, the Ravens, the Chiefs. I think most people in some order have them as the top 2 teams in the AFC coming into the year. How weird is this game, though, given everything we've just talked about? If you're those 2 teams, are you more interested in coming out of that game healthy than you are in winning at this point?
Well, no, you can't go into games thinking that. Of course, yes, but you're going to win the game. Look, you and I have really a lot of interest in this game because this was the Patriots and Colts for 7 or 8 years. And these are the 2 best quarterbacks, in my opinion. These are, I think, the best quarterbacks in Kansas City. But the most intriguing one is the one in Baltimore, and he's got to prove himself. Look, he looks awesome. But I am. This game is going to feel like almost like a playoff game, and we had a lot of these with the Colts. I had so much fun, and the great part was they met once during the season because they weren't in the same division, and they always met in the playoffs. So this is big because it's going to be the winner of this game probably will host the other team in the AFC Championship. That's why this game's important. And that happened a lot with New England and the Colts. I'm excited. I love them both. I think both teams, I'm more concerned. I think Kansas City hasn't shown me much yet, except that they're winners, and that's scary. And the Ravens look like they're all systems go. I'm more. I think the Ravens are probably going to win this game. And I think they're probably playing just a little better, but I'm more interested in the way the 2 guys play against each other, 2 quarterbacks. I love them both.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a great game. And I agree. I think Baltimore right now through 2 weeks is the most complete team so far in the NFL. And I think it's going to be a treat. I mean, after the long cold haul we had and all the wondering if there'd be a football season, Monday night's going to be a treat, I think, for fans across the country. Thanks a lot for your time, Bill. We'll check in again with you next week.
Great stuff. Patriots, we got a big game with the Patriots and Raiders next week, and the Colts got a big one too. So this is good. We'll know a lot more in about 2 weeks.
We absolutely will. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, George.
Thanks again to Bill. You can follow him every week at Burt Talk Sports. He's been all over the Patriots for more than 2 decades up there in New England. You can follow me and my Indianapolis Colts coverage at GM Bremer. Now let's shift gears a little bit and go to college football with Kevin Brockway of CNHI Sports Indiana and Elton Hayes of CNHI Sports Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to CNHI's Inside the Game. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. Elton, the news last week, Big Ten football is back. Indiana has not started full practices yet. They won't get going until next week, but still some interesting news around the league, particularly with the schedule reveal over the weekend. And Indiana will open at home with Penn State, which should be it should be interesting for both of us to be covering that game to start the season, either on the 23rd or the 24th.
Definitely. That's one that was, a touchdown separated the two teams last year up here in State College. Penn State got the win. It's coming back as quarterback, a healthy Whop Fillier, and a good defense led by Tywan Mullen. This is anyone's game. I'm very excited to see how this will work out. I know Indiana's going to ease in a new offensive coordinator, Nick Sheridan, but what a great game to start off the season with for both of those programs.
Yeah, I'm curious about the Penn State defense because, obviously you lose Etor Gross-Matos. You've got Shaka Toney back as a pass rusher. But then the question about Micah Parsons, whether he opts back in or not, I think could have an impact on Penn State's defense as well. I mean, if Parsons does not come back, do you see the Penn State defense as vulnerable, or there's some other guys that can kind of step in there?
Well, Parsons was a generational talent with the athleticism he possessed and just, his football IQ. No doubt, he was a preseason Associated Press first team selection at linebacker. So if you lose someone like that, it inevitably will, you'll feel it. Micah Parsons don't grow on trees. So, but the thing about Penn State, linebacker is a pretty deep position. You've got Jesse Luketa. You got some young guys in Brandon Smith, Lance Dixon. So it's a position, while it would hurt to lose a player as talented as Parsons, between a mix and match of other guys, I think they could help stem that a little bit. But yeah, definitely you lose a guy of that caliber, and you're going to feel it on defense a bit.
Yeah, Penn State always known as linebacker U, right? Back to the Shane Conlon days and so forth, and they always seem to find someone that's able to fill in that position, and have an assembly line of linebackers that have gone to the NFL over the years. So I think certainly on Indiana's side, what's going to be interesting, and another aspect that's going to be interesting in this matchup too, is two first-time offensive coordinators. Nick Sheridan at Indiana, and Kirk Carioca, right? Is that his name? At
Shiraka.
Okay.
Shiraka. It took me a while to get it too. So Sheridan, just think of Nick Sheridan, Shiraka. So Kurt Shiraka.
So Kurt Shiraka, tell me a little bit about him as an offense and his philosophy, and if there are going to be any new wrinkles, or if there's going to be anything you think different with Penn State this season.
Well, hey, one of Penn State's, questions this year is its depth at receiver. Losing a guy like KJ Hamler, who led Penn State the last two seasons in yards receiving, the guys behind him, they weren't really that involved in the passing game. Jahan Dotson's the most experienced of the group coming back, but one of the things that fans and Penn State look forward to this year, we're seeing how Shiraka kind of transformed this offense to be more of passing heavy. We saw what Shiraka did at Minnesota last year with Rashad Bateman and Tanner Morgan at quarterback, and I mean that it was high flying. And one of the things that's going to be a question mark is the fact that Shiraka didn't really get that in-person time during the spring and, in the summer to work with these guys, on air and against the defense. So he'll have a talented a playmaker in Pat Fryermuth, the tight end, who's, one of Penn State's two preseason AP All-American selections. Pat Fryermuth last week said he indeed is coming back, and he's playing this fall. So having a guy like that get involved in the offense will help. But that's one of the questions about Shiraka last year was at Minnesota. Tight ends weren't really used heavily in the passing game. But we asked Shiraka about that earlier this spring in one of the early pandemic Zoom meetings, and he said that they're going to find ways to get him the ball.
Yeah, and Sean Clifford also comes back. What are they looking for growth-wise from him at quarterback in year two as a starter?
I would say just kind of, just settling down and playing, a full 4-quarter game. Clifford, when he was really good, he was really good last year. He didn't have a lot of turnovers. He was efficient, but there were at times where, he kind of disappeared. I think they want to see him put it all together going into his second year as a starter. One good thing is Shiraka did make it make it to Dallas for the Cotton Bowl last year. Spent some time watching those guys in person and kind of, getting him an extra pair of eyes on him rather than just looking at film. So, just from the work that Shiraka did with Tanner Morgan at Minnesota last year, Clifford he's a dual threat. He's got legs. He can throw the ball. So I think it'll fit his skill set really well, having a guy like that, kind of guide him and lead him.
Yeah, and Michael Penix, one of the keys for him this year for Indiana is going to be staying healthy. He's put on about 10 or 15 pounds of muscle. He managed to keep it on. That's going to be the interesting aspect too, is I think that, the weight training, you kind of thought that maybe during the pandemic you lost that a little bit had they started in early September. But now I think that they've had this lag time here where they've been in the weight room. I do think guys will come into the season bigger and stronger because they did have that time in August and September that was able to, make up for losing that time in April and May as well.
That's a good point. We see with these other conferences, the Big 12, the ACC, and some of the Group of 5 conferences, those guys came right into summer workouts and, kind of went right into the season. That extra time that Penn State and the Big 10 programs will have to focus on weight training, that extra month while everyone else is still playing stuff is going to come in handy.
Yeah, and, the other aspect, too, about, certainly starting later is I think some of these Big Ten coaches are starting to evaluate a little bit about what it's like for these other teams around the country, playing with limited fans, playing without fans. Yeah. And I think what we're seeing, Elton, is a lot of upsets around the country, and a lot of road teams losing. Miami going up to Louisville and beating Louisville, UCF going up to Georgia Tech and beating Georgia Tech. And these are in front of, limited crowds of 20 to 25%. It'll be even more fascinating, I think, when we get into Big Ten season, seeing the impact of no crowds. I looked this up, and the top 3 in FBS in attendance last year, Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, 3 largest stadiums in the country, and they fill them. So, maybe that opens the door for some of the lesser Big Ten teams going into those stadiums without fans won't quite feel as intimidated. We'll be able to get, hear the snap count, et cetera, and maybe be able to function a little better.
I think that's a very good point you bring up. That's like you said, the Big Ten has 3 of the country's top 7 largest stadiums, and that's a factor when these teams go on the road and play. I know when Penn State went to Ohio State last year, it was full house, and it was crazy in there. Same thing when Michigan came to Penn State last year for the whiteout game. That the mystique of the whiteout is it's played at night in front of 107,000 people, and that just gives the home team an added element, kind of that 12th man, if you will. And Ohio State was supposed to be the whiteout game this year. That's not going to be the case. So it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts these teams going on the road and giving them a chance to compete in a very quiet environment where they can kind of get their thoughts together, like you said, hear the snap count, not get rattled by that crowd.
Yeah, and I did a schedule analysis earlier this week when the schedule came out on Saturday, and I had Indiana at 4-4. I do think they'll play competitive against Penn State, but I think they'll come up a little short in that game like they did last year. But I do think that it's kind of a tough early start for them, but I think a huge game for them is that 4th game of the season at Michigan State. Michigan State's a team that's vulnerable. They've got a new offensive new head coach in Mel Tucker. They also have, they've lost Brian Lewerke, their longtime starting quarterback. So I think that's a game where Indiana, if they go in 1-2, that could be a make or break season game. If they can even up their record, be 2-2 at that point, I think it could set up really well for them the second half of the season. How do you view Penn State, their schedule? How do you view them breaking down?
I think Penn State has a favorable schedule. They go, like I said, open up against open up against Indiana. They get Ohio State, Maryland, Iowa, and Michigan State at home. road games at Rutgers, at Michigan, and at Nebraska. That's not that bad of a road slate. Granted, there aren't going to be any fans there either way, but I think Penn State got a favorable schedule, definitely much more favorable than Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska is upset about Big Bad Penn State along with Ohio State, Bill Moose, and I don't know. I'm a big believer in play the games you were in front of you. You know, I talked to my friend Jim Coyle earlier today. We were discussing about he thought that Moose did make a good point as far as maybe counting division-only records instead of counting overall records. But, no other conference in the country does that. Just go and play the games that are in front of you.
Yeah.
And if you're good enough, you're good enough. If not, then, hey, develop, become better next year so that you can challenge, keep recruiting, keep working on your players so that you can challenge the big boys in the division. Because ultimately, you're going to have to face them in the Big Ten title game anyway.
Exactly. So now's the best time to do it, But it's a make or break year, or not a make or break year. I don't want to be dramatic, but this is a very important year for Scott Frost, Came back home to his alma mater, where he did very well as the Cornhuskers back in those teams in the 90s. And he's had a rough go of things. I believe he hasn't won more than 5 games in his 2 seasons there. It's going to be interesting to see what Nebraska is able to do under him. And, given these unprecedented, that's the word of the year, circumstances. But I think some pressure is on Frost to perform in year 3 in Lincoln.
Yeah, I think, the big issue with them remains the line of scrimmage, which is something they were traditionally known for in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly have some skill guys and Adrian Martinez and Wandale Robinson, but you've got to get the big hogs up front. And you've got to be able to create that physical mindset, and they haven't been able to do that.
And that's, like you said, that's what they were known for back in the 90s, just kind of imposing their will on both sides of the lines. And they have been far from that in recent memory.
Well, Elton, we'll get into it a little more as camps start to progress. And, before we know it, it's going to be October 23rd, 24th. It's going to be that big weekend. So certainly looking forward to that. So for Inside the Game, this is Elton Hayes with myself, Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports, signing off.
Thanks again to Kevin and Elton. You can follow Kevin's IU coverage at Kevin Brockway G1 and Elton in Penn State at EHDC 12. Let's go check in with Clay Horning of CNHI Sports Oklahoma. We'll talk with Clay Horning and CNHI Sports Oklahoma. One of your duties as well is sort of being the national columnist for CNHI. Folks out there can see your column in print on websites, any CNHI paper across the country. Wondering your take on the U.S. Open and Bryson DeChambeau winning by 6 strokes.
Well, I've given this thought, and not that this is important, but I play the game myself. I played in college. I feel like I can talk about the game, but if that was a British Open, his drives all over the place would have wound up in enough pot bunkers. He wouldn't have won the game where the penalty is quite a bit. You can't hit a 6-iron with the trajectory of a wedge. You get stuck in those bunkers. And I also feel like if they could bring the Open back to Winged Foot next season, if they grow rough in front of the greens, he can't land it 50 feet short out of that rough and let it come onto the green, which is what he did. So I feel like there are ways that courses can, protect themselves a little bit from what he did. But I also feel like what he basically did, he made putts. He hit it 325 yards, which did lead the field, but other players are hitting at 310 to 315 to 320. And what he did do was somehow manage to get it on the green out of that heavy rough. And it does help when you're 110 out and not 160 out. But other players are going to be in that position too. And the one thought is that, he's going to come into Augusta where they don't even have rough. But guess what? They don't have rough for the other players either. So it's just, we always worry that the game of golf is going to just be taken over. And I just don't see it happening. And on the off chance he does take it over, he becomes Byron Nelson and wins his next 12 starts like Nelson did once upon a time. Well, then we'll just, it'll be worth it because we'll be seeing a superstar. But I don't think he's that player. What I always go back to is if it was all about playing the kind of game he's playing, that's very much the game Dustin Johnson is already playing, and he's only won one major. So, it's going to be all right. Bryson, the game of golf is safe from Bryson DeChambeau, I think.
You've heard it here first. Golf will survive. One thing that's interesting to me about, everything's different in 2020. We're all well aware of that. But here we are in late September. We're still just a little more than a month away from the Masters. What do you think a November Masters is going to be like?
Well, I don't think the azaleas will be out for one. You know what? We don't. Maybe it's windy in Augusta, Georgia in November. I mean, I have no idea. It could be cold. That is not necessarily. I remember the one Masters where the azaleas weren't out because it was just unseasonably cold for the time. So they could be playing in 40 to 50 degree weather, which could be very interesting. The ball might not fly as far, which might make it a little bit interesting. It'll be strange and crazy, but it'll be exciting. I mean, we're going to get presumably 2 Masters in the space of about 6 months. So it'll be crazy. The amount of things going on are pretty crazy. It's odd not to see fans in the seats or galleries on the course, but what you are going to get is the NFL and college football and the Masters and just all happening at the same time. So it's sort of if you still have a job in the COVID economy and and you can still don't have to worry about things that are existential, it's a great time to be a sports fan for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Smorgasbord. All of a sudden we had that March that was barren and blank, and now we're making up for all of it. I think the World Series will be probably finishing up just maybe a week or two ahead
to say nothing of that. And I do feel like the baseball postseason will feel. How can you get your head around a 60-game regular season? I think that's difficult. But it has been nice just turning games on. It was nice that baseball came back. But come the playoffs, once you get into 4-7 series at the LDS, LCS, and of course the World Series, it's going to feel like baseball. And so yeah, absolutely, that's happening too. Holy cow!
Quite a time to be alive. Thanks a lot for your time, Clay, and we will check in with you again next week.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks again to Clay. You can follow him on Twitter @ClayHorning. Thanks for joining us. We will take you inside the game each and every week right here on your CNHI Sports website. We'll see you next week.